China Changing or Changing Global. So the session is chaired by Professor Hong Chi of NTU. So I'll give it to our chair to start the session.
Thank you very much for coming to this session. Today we are very privileged and honored to have three distinguished economists, including Professor Justin Lee, Professor Zhang Jun, and Professor Wing-Tai Wu. Now, first let me briefly introduce these three speakers. Professor Justin Lee, everybody knows him. Is a professor and dean of the Institute of New Structural Economics at Peking University. He was the chief economist and senior vice president of World Bank during the period of 2008 and 2012. And he's a fellow of the World Academy of Science and a fellow of the British Academy. And he authored more than 20 books on Chinese economy and published 300 papers in academic journals. The second speaker is Professor Zhang Jun. He's a distinguished professor of economics and high-profile Chinese economist. He's currently dean of the School of Economics at the Fudan University. Over the past 30 years, he has authored and edited numerous books on China's economy. He's the recipient of the Bergson Prize by American Association for Comparative Economic Studies and the winner of the best paper of the Journal of Chinese Business and Economic Studies in the UK. And he has been the frequent guest speakers at very occasions, including the Walton Park Conference, Chatham House, Brookings Institution, St. Gallen Symposium, and China Development Forum, and so on. He also writes for the Project Syndicate, a leading world opinion platform. He was my advisor back to Fudan University. Professor Wing-Tai Wu is the University Chair Professor at Liaoning University and Distinguished Professor Emeritus at University UC Davis. He was an advisor to the Ministry of Finance in China in 1994, special advisor to U.S. Treasury Secretary in 1997 to 1998 during the Asian financial crisis, and also special advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia during 2005 to 2008. And he is also the convener of the Asian Economic Panel, which meets triannually and publish the Asian Economic Papers by MIT. And from the CVs you can see there are three distinguished scholars and also play a very important role or impact in the real world. Now let's welcome Professor Justin Lee to talk about Chinese economy.
Well, thank you very much for coming to the session on Chinese economy. Time is short. I'll only make 3 points. The first one is about the slowing down of the Chinese economy. I'm sure that you hear a lot about the coming collapse of the Chinese economy in the past, but China did not collapse. So now the rhetoric about the Chinese economy changes to China peaks. There's a lot of argument. Chinese economy has already reached the peak in its economy. And this last quarter, the GDP growth rate in China was 4.3%. And that seemed to confirm the hypothesis of China peaks. But I'd like to say the slowing down in China, and according to those kind of hypotheses, mostly refer to the domestic structural problems and so on. And so according to those kind of hypotheses, China may follow the first step for Japan and reaching the peak and then continue to stay there. And I'd like to say, certainly China has a lot of domestic problems. But any country has a lot of domestic problems, right? China is not unique. In the past, China had a lot of domestic problems. And those domestic problems causing people to think that China was going to collapse, but China did not. And I'm sure this time will be the same. Like any country, China has a lot of domestic problems, but I'm going to argue those domestic structural problems and so on are not the root cause for the slowing down in the global economy, in Chinese economy. In fact, I think the slowing down in the Chinese economy is mainly China is in the global cycle. We know there's a great recession since 2008 in the developed world. And I can give you some statistics to support this great recession. From 1960 to 2008, the average annual growth rate in US was 3.3% annually. And after 2008, the average annual growth rate in the US dropped down to 2.1%. And according to the IMF prediction, in January this year, IMF predicted the US would grow at 2.2%. Now, because of the world with Iran and so on, the oil prices drop, surge. And now, according to IMF prediction, US growth this year is likely to be about 2.2%. And for the Eurozone, from 1960 to 2008, its average annual growth rate was 3.1%. And from 2008 to now, its growth rate was only 0.9%. And earlier this year, Eurozone was predicted to grow at 0.9%. But because of the surge in oil prices, now the new prediction was 0.8%. And if you look, OECD country together, from 1960 to 2008, the OECD countries' annual growth rate was 3.4% on the average. And now, after 2008, it dropped down to 1.7%, half. And the new prediction about the OECD country growth rate was 1.5%. And for the world, from 1960 to 2008, its annual growth rate was 3.7%. But from 2008 to now, the average annual growth rate in the world was 2.7%. And the prediction for this year will be 2.5%. And China certainly is part of the global economy. And especially, China is the largest exporting country in the world. And we know that before 2008, the world trade growth rate was more than twice of the world growth rate. Then after 2008, the world trade growth rate was lower than the world average annual growth rate. And China is the largest populated country, certainly. China was hurt the most. And we can look into the export growth rate in China. From 1978 to 2008, the average annual export growth rate in China was 18.1%. And if you look, after China joined the WTO in 2001, from 2001 and then 2008, the average annual export growth rate in China was 21.4%. Now, all of a sudden, after 2008, the global growth dropped, the global trade growth dropped even more, and under the kind of situation, certainly China's export has been hurt seriously. And now, with about less than 3% of the global trade growth, China's export growth can reach 5%, was considered to be extremely high. But in the past, of course, 20% now dropped down to the 5% or less. Under the kind of situation, certainly, the exporting sector in China built up huge excess capacity. And plus, the geopolitical tension with the US, the sanction on China and so on. So as a result, excess capacity in China certainly built up. And with the excess capacity, certainly, the private sector has an incentive to make investment, what we heard. And also with the excess capacity, job security and so on being heard, consumption confidence has been hurt. And as a result, certainly with slowing down in the investment, slowing down in the consumption, the GDP growth rate in China will be slowing down. So yes, there's a lot of domestic problem. Yes, the growth in China slowing down, but it was not mainly because of domestic issue. It was mainly because of this great recession in the world. That's my first point. The second point is certainly we all concerned whether China can maintain reasonable growth rate. Because after 2008, with the slowing down in the world, with slowing down in China, but China continued to contribute about 30% to the global growth. Will China be able to maintain those kind of performance or not? And I'm confident China will be able to maintain around 5% growth and continue to contribute about 30% to the global growth. Because if you want to look into China, most people look at the problems. But I think if you want to make a prediction about the growth in China, you need to look into the growth potential in China. And I think that China still has huge growth potential because China still enjoys a very large scope of latent advantages. I started to look into this issue in 2019. In that year, the average per capita GDP in China, measured by purchasing power parity, was about 22.6% of the US. That was similar to Germany in 1946, Japan in 1956, and Korea in 1985. And those three economies, they maintained more than 8% growth continuously for 16 years on the same status. And could give you exact number. From 1946 to 1962, the average annual growth rate of Germany was 9.4%, and its population growth rate was 0.8%. So the per capita GDP growth rate in Germany in those 16 years was 8.6% per year. And for Japan, from 1956 to 1972, the average annual growth rate was 9.6%, and the population growth rate 1%. So the average annual growth rate was 8.6%, similar to Germany. And for Korea, From 1985 to 2001, the average annual growth rate was 9%. In spite of the East Asian financial crisis, there was 1 year, and Korea's growth rate was negative. But in spite of that, its average annual growth rate was 9%. Annual population growth rate was 0.9%. So the per capita GDP growth rate in Korea was 8.1%. And then if those three economies, with the similar latecomer advantages, they can maintain more than 8% in the growth of per capita GDP. They indicate, there was a potential. There's a potential for China to achieve similar performance. And on top of that, now we have fourth industrial revolution, the AI revolution and so on. And for this fourth industrial revolution, those three economies, those three countries, they did not have their time of catching up. Now China has this opportunity. And for this fourth industrial revolution, China stands at the same starting line with the US and any other country. But China has three advantages. The first one, large talent pool. Each year, China has more than 5 million graduates in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the largest in the world. The second one, China has the largest domestic economy measured by purchasing popularity. And so there's a lot of opportunity for application of this new AI innovation and so on. And the third one, China has the best industrial ecosystem. China has a complete set of industry in the whole world. So any kind of idea, once you have, it's very easy to put into products and to produce at a low cost, timely, and to be competitive. So from all this, I think that from 2019 to 2035, I think that in terms of potential, there's a possibility for China to maintain 8% growth. But certainly, if you want to capture that opportunity, on the one hand, China needs to cope with the tension with the US, the friction. US want to embargo technology and so on. And secondly, you need to have fund for investment. And I think that China has sufficient fund because saving rate in China is around 45%. And so with this kind of potential, I think that China understand growth is the foundation to address any challenges. And China will be able to maintain around 5% growth in the coming 5 or even 10 years. And with that, China will continue to make a contribution to the global growth around 30% per year. That's my second point. This last point is the race, the competition in the AI revolution. For that, we know that US has some competitive advantages. The US is advanced country, rich country, they have kept abundant. So US, their AI development can be categorized as hardware intensive. They invest a lot in hardware, very capital intensive. And according to Goldman Sachs estimation, from 2026 to 2030, in those 5 years, the 4 big giants, Amazon and Microsoft, Alphabet, and Meta, they are going to invest $5.3 trillion US. Huge capital investment. But China is still catching up a country. We do not have so much capital. So we follow a different path. We follow some kind of software-intensive path. And according to some estimation, even for the 4 big guys in China, Ali, Tencent, and Baidu, and so on, their investment in hardware is only about a quarter of the US. And especially for the new startup, like a DeepSeek or the Kimi, the moonshot, they did not spend much money. But they are very good at innovating new softwares And then because of its labor intensive and labor cost in China is lower, we did not spend so much capital. And then as a result, the service provided by the China's AI and the US AI is about the same. But our cost is much more effective. And that's the reason why China can adopt the open system. And the US need to pay back the lost kind of capital investment. They need to collect money so they cannot open. But in the computational world, everyone likes to use the open system, right? Because you don't have to pay, or you only have to pay a little. So as a result, I think in the race for China, China has a upper hand. At the end, it's most likely the global AI system will follow China's open system. And in the race, most likely China will win out. And just like yesterday, that Jeffrey Sachs in his brilliant speech, China lost its position in the world because China did not catch up the opportunity of the first industrial revolution. And now, China has made almost losses in the first, second, and third industrial revolution. Now, with the competition of the fourth industrial revolution, from my analysis, most likely China will win out. And I think certainly that will be a good news for China. And if China win out with an open system, that will be a good news for the world. Everyone will have the opportunity to benefit from this fourth industrial revolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Lin. He gave us three very clear points. Number one, China's current slowdown could be still part of the consequence of a global recession starting from 2008. And the second point is China is likely to maintain about 5% growth rate in the next 5 years. And number three, China is likely to win the AI race with the US because China adopted a different model, a cost-effective way. When we look at China's economic issues in the newspapers, we always look for the dark negative points. Now, Prof. Lin gave us a very positive and bright picture about Chinese economy. Now, next we welcome Professor Zhang Jun to share his insights on Chinese economy.
Okay, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be on this session focused on the Chinese economy. I think so over the past couple of years, especially during the post-COVID period of time, and this the thousands of the misconception and misunderstanding of the Chinese economy in one way or another. I think one of the reasons why people are not so optimistic about the future of the Chinese economy, as mentioned by Justin, is that China got serious of the structure problem, right? And there's no way that China can address the issue. But actually, I think so the all of the phenomena we probably can observe outside of China is about the structure. I mean, it's this structure adjustment, not the structure issue. So the title of my talk is something like the Chinese economy out about the structure adjustment. I think it's 10 years ago when the new government decided to give up the way they manage the macroeconomy that they used to it's really not that easy, but they committed, to change the mindset, and hopefully they could come up the policy frameworks that would have been able to adapt, the changed conditions facing the Chinese economy, especially during the period of time where the U.S. Began to wage the war against China. Wage the trade war against China. There's increasing signal that the geopolitics is going to change a lot. So the Chinese government recognized that, I think so. They had a series of the meeting, discussing the current issue of the Chinese economy, in the sense that the economy needs to be, well managed in order to cope with the rising risk from the geopolitics, from the increasing tension with the U.S., etc. So 10 years ago, the government decided to modify the policy framework, away from where they used to stimulate the demand side of the economy, onto the new focuses on the supply side. So they decided to put more emphasis on the structure adjustment, to try to adapt to the new environmental and changing conditions facing the economy. So they really, I think it's very hard, but they really, try to achieve that goal by, not stimulating that much the demand side. They said they only keep the modest growth of the demand, domestic demand, and not really, creating, this structural issue anymore. So my first point, along with this line, would be that China is actually is giving up, the growth model that they used to, drive the Chinese economy. I think that we have, we spend too much time, discussing about the growth model, right? Because it's largely driven by, for instance, the investment, especially investment into the, real estate sector or something like that. So over the past couple of years, we can clearly see that the government, has been understanding, the significance of the shift of the growth model, right? So they put, I would say, if you look at the macro policy, especially in the monetary policy, they made, a lot of changes to that. They try to keep the interest rate in real terms, quite modest, right, over time, in order to facilitate the change of the model, so that they don't want to create the bubble anymore by huge injection of investment into the real estate sector. So they reorganize the resources in a way that they could, encourage more growth momentum from something new, right? So this is the first point I just want to say is that we have to understand that there is the gradual movement away from the traditional old-fashioned growth model, where the investment is the huge, driver for the economy, to a model which is largely based on the productivity or technological diffusion across the sectors of the whole economy. The second point is that has something to do with the macro economy of China at this moment. I think a lot of people say we're the we have a very weak demand, because supply side is still very much stronger, but the demand side is has been weak. But I think if we interpret this through the perspective of the structure adjustment, it doesn't really make sense that the macro economy in China is suffering from some of the serious imbalance. Because if you understand the structure adjustment, could it somehow bring about deflationary pressure on the whole economy? I think this is quite understandable, right? And we have very strong. For instance, we have a very strong export sector, right? It's been growing quite a lot over the past couple of years to help the macro economy. But even that, I think the contraction in the demand is largely a result, of the real estate sector's contraction. Because in the real estate sector, became quite sluggish right now, and the government still believe there is the bubble still going to take time, to wipe it out. So that's going to take time for the Chinese economy to touch the bottom in terms of the investment. So the investment, the growth rate of investment, has been declining in consecutive years, largely because of the housing sector, declined dramatically. So this is not a big serious problem, because this actually going to help stabilize the economy, because it squeeze out the bubble, in such kind of high investment driven sector, right? So there has been the large part of the resources, as we have seen from across the Chinese sectors, is we have a large part of the resources being poured into the new sectors. So we have a growing part of the new economy, right? Highly driven by application of the technology. So China, I agree with Jocelyn said that China, enjoys a huge advantage, in terms of technological progress, because this is highly, application-driven, pattern of the change of the technology. Because the technology play a very important role today to promote the economic development and to contribute a lot, to the growth of the Chinese GDP today. So even we have seen the downsizing of the investment in housing market, but we still, see the robust growth of investment in the new sectors, especially in the high-tech, sectors. So this is not the, structural issue. It's kind of the structural adjustment, by the Chinese policy, so that we have the huge transformation of the economy, so that the technology will play a vital role in the sources of the world in China. The third point is about the strength of the Chinese economy, because so many speculations about Chinese economy pointed to the weakness of the economy, right? But I think that we didn't see, or we didn't try to understand the strength of the Chinese economy. But the strength rests on the production side, rests on the production system. I think that both the government and the entrepreneurs are all working hard to try to build up the capacity in building the ecosystem in the technological sector, and also for trying to innovate, right, in many of the new sectors, including the smart technology, EVs, new renewable technology, renewable energy technology, pharmaceuticals, etc. So this is all the new drivers of the growth as a result of restructuring of the economy through the increasing injection of the resources, credit, capital into these new sectors. So I think the strength of the Chinese economy is as a developing economy, as an economy with the per capita GDP being something like 25% of the U.S. I think they're gonna really need to build their own capability. Not only for instance to having the ecosystem to create the new technology themselves, but also handle the development in the manufacturers, which highly integrated with the global supply chain. So that's really I think is the obvious strength of the Chinese economy. It's not the weakness of the economy at all. So let me stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zhang Jun. Yeah. We see in this new normal of globalization with a huge tariff imposed by the U.S. and this U.S.-China rivalry, tech competition, we still see a quite healthy growth in China. And this result surprised, I think, most economists and also observers. Why we see China's export grow so much, and we see China's advancement in several sectors, including EV, battery, solar panel, all kind of new technologies. And Professor Zhang Jun provides a very interesting and unique perspective of structural adjustment. This is a new way or new thinking of China's policy makers to handle the situation of we see here the debt issue, the housing market, the low growth in consumption. And we also understand from this perspective of structural adjustment, the pain and the K-curve growth in China, and also the strengths of the Chinese economy. Now we move to the third panelist, Professor Wing-Tai Wu.
Good afternoon. I agree with Justin Lim that the external world has powerful impact on the Chinese economy. Just look, there's no doubt, given that the fastest growing component of GDP is the export sector. But China is not a small economy. It means that while the external environment shapes the outcome in China, China is a big player. It is able to shape the environment outside of China as well. So the two questions I will seek to raise for discussion. Number one, what is the global governance architecture that China would like to see in order to ensure that the external environment is a smaller shock than what it is at the moment? The second question is, can China afford to fund the global governance architecture that it would like to have? So let's look at the first, to answer the first question of what would be the global governance structure that China would like to see. I like to put it in the context of the fact that this year is the 250th anniversary of the publication of the Wealth of Nations. We all know that Adam Smith is famous for pointing out that division of labor raises productivity. But division of labor is not possible unless there is trade. So trade is at the center focus. And clearly, the larger the market, the finer the division of labor, the higher the productivity. So the best outcome is economic globalization. The whole market, the whole world is a market. But it is interesting to note that this is not what Adam Smith emphasizes in the second half of the book. In the first half of in the second half of the book, Adam Smith said, I just told you about how free trade is great for you, right? But in fact, according to Adam Smith, in the second half of the book, in the second half of the book, it's hard to read, but let me summarize what he says in half of the book. Globalization really took on big when Christopher Columbus connected America to Europe. And when Vasco da Gama, that was 1492, and then Vasco da Gama connected Asia to Europe by sea, 1498. He said, this is written in 1776, mind. He said, if you go back to 1500, the last 300 years, globalization has nothing but a disaster for the rest of the world except for the Europeans. The reason why is not because trade is no good, but because why should you seek benefits from trade when you can just grab it from the other person because you are stronger? Basically, just grab it. Why trade? And he says, yes, this is a terrible process. Genocide in Latin America, colonization in East Asia, and the fight for free trade in opium in China. So all these are terrible things, but there's something positive. The interaction between the oppressed and the oppressor is one of inevitable diffusion of knowledge. The oppressed sees what the oppressor knows and possesses, and he comes to learn it. And in the end, there will be an equality of force. This is basically a prediction of economic convergence. This, I think, is the real brilliance in the book, rather than the fact that division of labor increases productivity. The prediction has held out very well. The prediction has come today. There is equality of force. And what are the consequences of this equality of force? The first one is well known. There are three things that work. The first one is you look at this huge increase in material production around the world. What that means? That means that there will be great pollution of the natural environment and great over-extraction of natural resources. That's why we have the Paris Climate Treaty, the biodiversity framework. Basically, the first outcome that was unexpected by Adam Smith is the tragedy of the global commons, which I call the environmental trend. The second thing that has happened is the big growth that has happened since 1949 has been possible because there has been no world war since 1945. The Great Peace allows countries to invest, people to accumulate knowledge, and growth, catching up growth occurs. What has maintained that peace is the security arrangements that were put in place in 1945. How can you prevent the big powers from fighting? One way to prevent them from fighting is that they divide up the world. Eastern Europe one side, Western Europe one side, North Korea, we draw a straight line through, is up there, belongs to the Russian sphere, the other stuff to the American sphere, and so forth. And what are the areas of contestation? Africa and China, and so on. So there was agreement. But then they found out that was not enough. The other thing is to ensure mutual survival, they have to have arms limitation treaty. How many nuclear bombs should we each have, and where should we place them? Russia cannot place it in Cuba, and America cannot place it in Turkey. That was how the crisis was happening. But the amazing thing is, despite this need for common survival, the latest arms limitation treaty expired on the 5th of February this year. Are US and Russia not afraid of that, of nuclear clash? The reason it expires is because it makes no sense now. Because China is an equally powerful nuclear power. And no arms limitation treaty makes sense unless China is also in it. So what we see is that all the major powers realize, at least US and Russia, that there will inevitably be a Yorktown kind of negotiation back in 1945. How shall we divide up the world? And how should we have the arms limitation treaty? This will lay the basis of the global governance architecture. Now, the question is, what is the rational thing to do if there are going to be negotiations in the near future? The rational thing to do is strengthen your hand in bargaining now. How do you strengthen your hand? Expand your spheres of influence. That's why Russia grabbed Ukraine. And Donald Trump said, what is Greenland doing within Danish territorial borders? And what is Canada? Why is Canada not the 51st state? And he kidnapped Maduro to show that the Monroe Doctrine applies equally in force. China, the 9-dash line, where China's maritime boundary is right up to the doorstep of every Southeast Asian country. Now, what is the danger of this the preemptive expansion of spheres of influence? Clash might happen. That's why we hear all this talk about the Thucydides trap. The next one is our economists get very, very fascinated about systemic stability that Kinderberger talks about. You know, who's going to coordinate the Paris Climate Treaty, the biodiversity framework, and now in this digital age, we must prevent AI from going rogue. We are all very good in talking about the good equilibrium of AI, but there's no unique equilibrium. The bad equilibrium is an autonomous killing machine. So how do we prevent bad equilibrium? That needs global oversight of AI. But that cannot be done because we are too involved. We dare not do it because the other party may get ahead. So, given this particular outcome that we see in the world today, this is a concern of the big powers. But how about the rest of us? What do we want? What we want is, we don't want to be in any sphere of influence. Southeast Asia, every Southeast Asian country say, we want to have agency. We don't want to belong to any one sphere because that would limit our trading partners. and we want the whole world market. We want to be neutral, that's what they say. Anwar Ibrahim, Prabowo Subianto of Indonesia, and certainly the French, Macron said it last year in Singapore, and Martin Carney said it in Davos earlier this year. Now, the question is, what should China choose in terms of global governance architecture? The first one is to join in this great preemptive expansion of sphere of influence, like what Russia and America is doing. In other words, agree to the division of the world. That's the first choice. The second choice would be pick up Donald Trump's offer, which he made in Busan last year at the APEC conference. What Donald Trump suggested is what Kissinger has always said. Why should the US and China try to take things from each other? The rest of the world is so much bigger. We should partner up and bully everybody else together. That is G2. You know, let's bully the rest of the world together. That is G2. The third option is to respect the wishes of the rest of the world. Reject sphere of influence, reject this domination of the rest of the world through a partnership with the US, but to promote the formation of this non-partisan coalition that wants to be friends to all, rather than in this. Which one should China choose of these three options that it sees? Well, we first ask the question, what is the normal attitude of big powers to small countries that ask for neutrality? The history of the world is neutrality by any country is dangerous for a superpower. Malaysia is neutral, Indonesia is neutral, Philippines declare neutrality. Who knows, Australia might join in. And what happens to the US alliance? After all, the Australian Prime Minister in 1999 described Australia as the deputy US sheriff in the South Pacific. That means unraveling of their alliances. So the usual attitude is you squash it. This is true. The best example is the island of Milos, when he say he wants to be independent. And Athenians say the powerful will do what it can, and the weak will suffer what it must. Because we can do it, so we do it. And so they wiped out the city and took away all the women and children. So non-partisanship is not achieved by declaration. This is well known. This is why there have been many efforts by the non-superpowers to form clubs. You want to seek safety in numbers, right? The most famous one is the 1955 Bandung Conference. Then you have the non-aligned movement. And since we are in Singapore, and Singapore is a signatory, it is the 1971 Declaration of the ASEAN Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality. But of course, they all fail. Why did they fail? The first one is, these are all low-income countries. When you're low income, the big powers can buy you. That's number one. The other one is, you are too poor to fund an adequately strong coordinating unit that can hold things together. Because there are many things going on, and you've got to have a coordination agency to mediate disagreements and so forth. They cannot afford to fund. Of course, the second one is also very important, which is that in any organization, especially at the beginning, there are a lot of internal squabbles. Who's going to be who? What is the sequence by which we all take turns being the boss? And these squabbles allows the big powers to interfere, to manipulate, divide and rule. So all of this has been failures. So what would it take for a neutral coalition to survive and be recognized? The important thing is, how can it achieve recognition by the superpowers? The first one is, you've got to be a member of a large club, such that it equals the firepower of the superpowers. The second one is the club must be able to form very quickly so that you don't have time to interfere too much. The third is, if you are truly neutral, you should have friends on both sides. You have friends of the US in the club, you have friends of China in the club. It cannot just be EU. EU is traditionally the friends of the United States. So what would satisfy this condition of relative cohesive large club quickly? You take two clubs that are cohesive and merge them. That's the quick way to get the fastest one. What are the two clubs that are cohesive and could be merged? One is what I call the global north minus the US, which I call it the rest of the West. EU, UK, Australia, South Korea, Japan, or New Zealand. This group equals the US in GDP and destroys the population. The second group that we join in, so the first group is friends of the US traditionally. The second group is friends of US and China, so that gives a neutrality. Is the population the same as the rest of the West? And given the economic convergence will happen, they will become as big as the rest of the West in the future, which means that they'll be twice the size of the US or China in the future. So, let me put in a placeholder name. I call it the Atlantic Pacific Sustainability Partnership. This coalition of the rest of the West and ASEAN. And of course, it has to be economics at the center. You have an open regionalism with free trade. Anybody can work with superpower, welcome to trade versus free trade. But Donald Trump wants to cut tariff, he can put it up, but we won't do it among ourselves, not against other people. Right? And I call this the Atlantic Pacific Economic Cooperation, which is APEC 2.0, as opposed to Asia Pacific Economic Structure. Now, non-partisan, you've got the Peace Caucus. The second one is you've got to have a development agency, because this is a club of global north and global south leader powers. And to prevent the patronage from buying out the poor members, the rich members of the club must help the poor members of the club. Basically, this is just the UN template together the World Bank and WTO in a smaller version. Now let me talk about how can you survive the birth pains of APSP, because I say always that internal squabbles. And the history of the formation of real cohesive group like the EU needed a midwife, someone who is there assisting in times of internal disagreement and difficulties. That's what the US did in the birth of the EU. How was EU started as in practice? The Marshall Aid. How was Marshall Aid designed? The European countries could not come to the US with an individual shopping list. They had to form a group to come up with a collective shopping list, and then the money is given to the group to be distributed to the members. This was the European Economic Cooperation Council. So all these former enemies had to work out agreements and operational protocol. Hence, they are able to start working together. And when Germany started rearming, the French objected. The French wanted Germany to remain, not have an army. And the Americans solved that problem by putting the German army under NATO command, so that there be no unilateral action by the Germans. So making a war difficult. So that was of course, but of course fundamentally at the end things got on. The Europeans pursued the agenda on by themselves. I would say if an organization forms and if there is enough midwifery done, by a superpower, it could survive. And let us ask, which superpower would have the incentive to be the midwife of the birth of this new organization? There are three superpowers that I'll talk about. India will come up in the future, but right now there are three. One would be Russia, US, and China. How they will act depends on their motivation. And what is motivation? One could be defensive, or the other one is just pure imperialistic. So how do we interpret Russian action in the Ukraine? Is it because it was defensive and refused to let Ukraine join NATO? Or is it because, like Putin said on the day of the invasion, Ukraine has always been part of our country. It has no business being independent. So we are just taking back what has historically been part of us. So that is an imperialistic possibility. Then for the US, is it defensive when it says it wants Greenland? Or is it being imperialistic? Well, certainly if Russia is defensive, it would support the formation. Do you know why? Because if its goal was a neutral Ukraine, a neutral Europe would be a much greater price than a neutral Ukraine, right? It would support it. And if the Americans were defensive in their actions, then it might reject, because it would mean that Australia, Korea, Japan stop being deputy sheriffs of the US. So it would object. But on the other hand, this organization would be a big barrier against China's expansion into the second island chain. So the US might well agree to. For the case of China, if China were defensive, China would agree to it, because what's wrong with neutrality? But if China were imperialistic, it would also support it. Why? Because the deputy sheriffs of the US are gone. Okay. So what happens is, in such a situation, China should choose the third option that I talked about. However, when you choose to extend to play the role of midwife, you have to bankroll many of the facilities. Can China afford to bankroll it? Here, we know that this is from Harry Wu Xiaoyin, from Justin's shop. He decomposed GDP. And the thing that I want to point out is many studies have shown that TFP growth rate has been negative. And if you want to crunch it further and see where has TFP growth rate been negative, is it because the sector has negative growth, or is it because there's a misallocation of capital? Capital went to the less efficient industries, or labor going to less efficient industries. Then we find that the capital is always negative. How shall we think of this in light of what Justin and Chang Chun said? Many people will say, it's the coming collapse of China. But I think the story is not so simple. The negative TFP growth does not have to be, does not necessarily reflect incompetent management. Just think of the Iranian war. Oil shortage over the world, rise in oil prices, social instability, but you don't see any of that in China. The reason is because they have spent lots of money building underground storage tanks by the hundreds. So, but when you build all these empty tanks under the surface, what does it do to GNP? It doesn't contribute to GNP, so TFP must be negative. But on the other hand, the crisis did come, and it prevented the economy from collapsing. So it was insurance. So the negative TFP was what you pay in premium to prevent the big collapse. And more importantly, just think of the blockage of chips. That is something that China may be less efficient in producing chips. But you cannot not have it, because then your whole system will stop. So on that note, when the world comes down, then China would not have to spend so much money on insurance. And when it doesn't have to spend so much money on insurance, then the TFP would not be negative anymore. Now the question is, which is right? Incompetent management, because it is very popular in China to talk about old industries that are being the zombie firms and so forth. Well, which is the bigger influence? That, I think, something that I am studying, and I hope to report the results of that in the future SER conference. Thank you.
For your very interesting and insightful speech. He proposed a middle power club theory for the countries in this region on the shadow of the U.S.-China rivalry. Now we have some time for Q&A. We start the floor here. Raise your hand if you have any questions.
Thank you. I have a question particularly for Professor Lin. The export-less strategy, typical of China for decades, has been strong, but we know that it also has weaknesses. And the weaknesses is basically the dependence on external markets. I think that the real, or at least I suspect, that the real weakness of the Chinese situation is the inability so far to promote domestic demand by consumers, which is potentially huge. Why? That is the question to understand. There are certainly cultural reasons which are very difficult to mobilize in the short or medium run. But if I think at the history of Europe, where I come from, I think that the real change in the post-war years, which promoted economic miracles and expansion, was the rapid build-up of the welfare state, the generalization of the pension system. I think that China is very slow in promoting this fact. That is natural that consumers are prudent. In particular, if you think that Europe built out the welfare state in a very lucky and positive period when there was no demographic crisis. So Italian families, German families, so on, had various children. Parents knew that when they will grow up, they will become, the children will grow up, and the parents will become old. They will have various children to take care of the parents. Now, we are having a serious problem in Europe because of the demographic crisis, okay? And which goes hand in hand with the dismantling of the welfare state, with the worsening of pension privileges, and the outcome is we are having decreasing in many countries, decreasing incomes, and increasing family savings, which is a double hit on the perspective of growth. I think that China is risking to meet this constraint because with a one-child family and the change in attitude of younger Chinese families vis-à-vis children, parents are rational in not increasing consumption in spite of economic growth and the dynamic growth of incomes in China. Much better situation than in Europe. Why? Because they know that in the future, two parents, in the best case, will have one child looking after them. So they have to save. So my concern is that the real key for the future of China growth is certainly the changed attitude of the rest of the world vis-a-vis not the consumers, because the consumers are very happy that we can buy good, very good, and relatively cheap Chinese goods. But we know that industries, producers are pressuring their governments in order to stop imports in one way or the other. So my question is, do you think that the lack of sufficient development of the welfare system in China, and in particular the pension system, together with the demographic crisis, can be the real problem in China now and probably for many years to come? Thank you.
Take a number of questions.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And I'd like to offer a little bit of different perspective regarding your question. First, you describe China as a country following export-led growth. I don't fully agree with that. Yes, China export grows very strongly, but China's imports also increased very strongly. And I can give you the figures. From 1978 to 2025, the average annual growth rate of export was about 14%. But import growth was about 13%. So the difference is only 1 percentage point. And that's the reason why China need to have 1 percentage difference. And secondly, many people say the consumption in China was very weak. I don't fully agree with that. Because if you look into the annual consumption growth rate, it was 7% for years, from 2017 to 2025. The highest in the whole world, with a 7% growth continuously for 48 years, the strongest in the whole world. And you know that per capita GDP growth rate in China in the past 47 years was 8% per year. And the consumption growth rate was 7% per year. That's 1 percentage point difference. But there are good reasons for that. The reason related to your later, China is encountering aging. With aging, China needs to save for the future needs. If China would not save, then in the future, China is going to encounter the crises that you observe in so many countries. And with that, 8% growth in income, 7% growth in consumption, to have 1 percentage of saving. That was preparing for the aging. And because of 1 percentage of savings, certainly we would have to export more and import less with 1 percentage difference. So all the story has been consistent. And with that, I would not describe China's model as export-led growth. I consider China's model is a country following China's competitive advantages in its growth. And when China follow the competitive advantages, certainly means the area which China has competitive advantages, China will do the export and they're very competitive. But area where the China does not have competitive advantages, China would have to do their own import and also import very strongly. And that kind of model makes China's economy to be able to sustainable.
Any other questions from the floor? Please. Introduce yourself first.
Okay, thanks for the conversation. It's very interesting. I'm Junsen Liu from World Bank China office. So I have a question. Actually, it's about economic growth and economic convergence within China. China is very big, and different regions have different economic performance, and the inland provinces still have a large gap to catch up with the coastal province. But if we start to look at data from 2008, look at provincial GDP per capita, there's actually the catching up between the lagged province with the coastal province with the help of infrastructure and also the relocation of manufacturing. But this type of catch-up somehow stacked since 2015. So my question is, how to think about the relation between growth and convergence for the new growth model? Because those tech-driven activity is mostly concentrated in the coastal city, and also there are lots of population in the lagged province, and now the migration is also kind of slowed. Yeah. So should we still do the catch-up, or the catch-up is okay, we can start to go back to let some people reach first and then help other people? So that's my question about the growth and the convergence inside China. Thanks.
For profiling or jumping or we?
Can we ask for?
Maybe just
I'll do it.
You can do it?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Thanks.
If you look at the proportion of GDP across the 50 US states, you will see that it equals the proportion of population in each US state. And that holds across time. In the case of China, you do not see such a close correspondence. The reason is because the government wants to, at least in the Hu Jintao era, emphasize a lot of investments, industrial parks in the West. And what has happened is that coincides with a growth slowdown and the rise of negative TFP. The reason is because all over the world, people move to better opportunities. So like America, North Dakota is going back to the buffaloes because people are moving out from North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming to the cities. In Japan, Tokyo is bigger and bigger every year, even though the total population is declining. Why? The way to what you want to equalize is not GDP across provinces. You want to equalize GNP per capita. And a big, powerful mechanism is allowing the movement. So the policy of preventing Shanghai, Tianjin, Beijing, and the Pearl Delta from expanding is a big mistake. People should go where the opportunities are, and if there are no opportunities, they will go home. So, coming back to the question that I was raised earlier, is that why is there such low consumption in China? Many, many, many reasons, one of which is because of the hukou system. The hukou is a household registration system where you may contribute to the pension fund of that city that you work in, but then you have to go home when you retire. Then you cannot withdraw the pension funds, although that is changing now. That is a big change, very good change. But in the end, there was not. So basically, there was a taxation on all the migrant workers. And in general, how is China able to finance with so much investment? That comes because consumption is suppressed not by culture, but by high taxation of various types. And the banking system is easier to get a house loan than a consumption loan. In other words, what we talk about permanent income hypothesis, consumption smoothing, that's not possible given the financial system. So that's why the consumption is unnaturally low. The thing is, rural reform of various nature, which includes the elimination of the hukou system, will speed up the convergence and raise the consumption expenditure of the population. And of course, you're going to talk about the only thing cultural about it I can think of is what Ma Yun says, that we should have the culture of 996. You work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. Well, then you have no time for consumption. So basically, this tendency of overtime that's built into the workplace has to be changed, that people could have a time for consumption. And I think there are structural things that are keeping the consumption especially low. When you think of rural reform, it's not just Wuko. How about the land? Should a part of the rural land be tradable among the holders? So these are interesting questions, but what it means is these are problems that can be solved. That means that this growth potential to be unleashed. So that's a good way to look at it.
Maybe for the sake of debate, I'd like to offer a little bit different perspective. And I already answered. What really we have to look at is not percentage of consumption in GDP. What really people cares is about the growth of their consumption. And yes, as a percentage of GDP in consumption, China was relatively low compared to other countries. But the growth of consumption in China has been so fast, similar to Singapore. If you look into the saving in Singapore has been even higher than China. But that's the reason that Singapore now can reach per capita GDP of more than 90,000 US dollars, even higher than the US. Because if you want to raise the per capita GDP, you need to raise productivities. And if you want to raise productivity, you need to make investment. And the investments funding comes from the savings. And I can compare, Singapore and Hong Kong. In the 1980s, Hong Kong's per capita GDP was about 30% higher than Singapore. Today's Hong Kong is only about 50% of the Singapore. And certainly, if Singapore saved half of that, then about, if Singapore has per capita GDP of 90,000, now they save 50%, they only consume 50%, that's 45,000 US dollars. And in Hong Kong, the consumption rate has been much higher. And now they only have about 45,000 US dollars. Even they consume 100%. That's less than the consumption in Singapore. So I think that we talk too much about consumption as a percent of GDP. That was misleading. Certainly, the saving has to put into productive use. As long as you can put the saving into the productive use, then the high investment rate, the raw saving rate, it's not an issue, for the nation and also for the well-being of the household.
Thank you, Prof. Lee. Professor Zhang Jun, I know you have a paper on China's consumption. Do you have any points to add? Why China's consumption rate is so low?
Right.
How to boost
That's a very complicated issue because, for something to do, for instance, with the behavior of Chinese household in saving, and also Iran, some of the statistics, mismeasurement, something like that. The paper that I work with, my colleague, is trying to re-estimate the share of the consumption, household consumption, as a percentage of GDP, which we found that actually there are some of the heating spending by household because it was taken care of by government. And also, there were a lot of spending that needed to be, estimated by the National Bureau of Statistics. For instance, China really, if you look at the cross-country comparison, China really has very high, household who own their own, apartment, right? So they didn't pay to themselves the rental every month, right? So you need have the way to estimate the imputed rent, right? For not only for urban residents but also for the rural residents as well. So then we discovered that perhaps 10 percentage points need to be added to the official number in order to take care of the imputed rent and other heating spending by household. So this is some of the findings of our paper. Yeah, but I totally agree with Justine. You don't need to care about the share. I mean, because there's huge differences across countries. Not only Singapore, but if you look at Korea, right, or even even Japan in the 1960s, 70s, I think that it doesn't really tell you any structural problem. It's quite natural. I mean, because for this East Asian economies, households need to take care of themselves relatively because they figure out the future spending, they take care of the children, education, Medicare. So they put a lot of disposable income in deposit in the bank. So that is doesn't really say that this country has got a problem. It is actually sources of growth, the rapid growth to some extent, because you have the phase of development where you desperately need capitalize the resources, so that becomes the sources of growth. But even today, if you look at the total demand spending as a percentage of Chinese GDP, it's almost 95 or 97%. If you assume that the China is going to expand spending more by household, well, that means China is going to suffer the trade deficit in the long run. But I don't see any possibility that China would return to the status where China can run the deficit every year, because as I mentioned, the strength of the economy is actually the manufacturing, and the export. So no way that China can run the trade deficit. So which means that the total spending, which include both the household spending, corporate spending, government spending, total, is slightly less than Chinese GDP, right? So that you run the trade surplus, right?
Thank you, Professor Zhang Jun. I think three distinguished professors. We started late and we also finished late. Sorry for that. The formal dialogue session ends here, but you can still come to our professors to ask your questions after this session. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to this session.
Right, thank you, Professor Feng Qi, and our excellent group of China experts on the stage. The final parallel sessions for today begin already at level 5 breakout rooms. So